Hello and welcome to the show. I am here on Kerbal Space Program with a challenge. I am going to attempt to build a rocket car to beat the current land speed record, which stands at 763 miles an hour, or 341 meters a second, as that's the unit that's used for speed in Kerbal Space Program. That is my goal, 341 meters a second. Now, that's easy. For rockets, I've gone much faster, but I'm going to be trying to build a vehicle to do that on the runway that we have here, and I also want the vehicle to survive it. Now, Kerbal is designed for sending rockets up into space and for building the occasional plane and so on. Not really designed for building rocket cars, but yeah, I'm going to be giving it a try. Essentially, this first build, the Mark 1 if you like, of this is going to be a rocket with some wheels strapped to it. That's what we're kind of aiming for here. We've gone for the Mark 1 cockpit, as it's a nice cockpit. I quite like it. It's quite streamlined as well, and it means that when we put we can have quite sort of an aerodynamical rocket when we stick the fuel tanks on. I was umming and ahhing over what size fuel tank to go with. I mean, fuel is not really a huge concern in that we're not going to run out of fuel in this very short space of time that each run is going to take. But I went for the larger of the fuel tanks, thinking that a slightly bigger craft may be a good idea. Just having it a little bit bigger for stability's sake, really, might be a decent idea. And for controllability, you don't want a twitchy vehicle, not when you're trying to do this sort of silly speed. So for the Mark 1 version of my car, I also went for a sort of an air-breathing engine, one of the jets, as I've never really used them. I can't think of a time that I've used them, so I thought I would give it a go. But of course, being an air-breathing engine, you do need an air intake. I was looking around trying to find the one I was going to show. You can have these great big things sticking off the side of your your rockets, your car, your plane, whatever it is that you're building. In my case, my slightly dodgy car. I ended up not going for it though. I went for a smaller air intake, figuring we didn't really want all the extra drag of having the huge one, and we didn't need a huge one. So yeah, went for a relatively simple air intake above the cabin. Now, as I said, I want the vehicle here to survive it. Also, notice there is a spoiler, so we had to have a spoiler on the first iteration of this. Unfortunately, it's not quite going to do a massive amount. As far as wheels go as well, I did download a mod, the Kerbal Foundries mod, that adds some very cool little, fairly large wheels in some cases, designed for rovers, but they are much stronger than the game's standard wheels. The ones that I've used before, these things, they'll do up to 50 meters a second, which is no good for what I'm going to be doing. So yeah, it was a case of try out some different wheels. Now, there is the landing gear. It says it can only do 25 meters a second. Ignore that. These landing gear ones that look slightly peculiar sticking out of here, but yeah, I don't know quite why they say crash tolerance is only that when they can go a hell of a lot faster. Either way, these wheels are more than capable of getting up to the required speed. Just got to make sure that you have them actually the right way round. They are rather large wheels. I don't know how on earth you'd ever get a rover to space when if it had these size wheels, because rovers are quite difficult things to maneuver around. But yeah, these are some pretty hefty wheels on the side. Admittedly, not the most aerodynamical sort of wheels, but for the first sort of test thing, I figured we would go with that. Now, one thing you do have to be wary of with these is steering. Of course, if you try to do the slight steering inputs at very high speeds, it's going to go wildly out of control. So I disabled all of the steering from the wheels and the steering that comes with the engine itself. I was going to be using tail fins. The tail fins are what are going to do the steering for this, because if I'm using the actual wheels to steer, it'll just go out of control, because you can't do small enough movements with them at the high speeds. It'll just fall off it'll veer massively and roll and then all explode. So we're going to be using the tail fins for steering. And as far as the survivability, I will get back to that, because I need to get this up to high speeds, but the runway isn't particularly long. It's not going to be enough time for me to slow it down to get up to the speed. What I'm going to go for is essentially a glide off the end of the runway. As the floor drops away after you leave the runway, by having these little wings on the side of the car, we can go for a glide, and then hopefully that'll give me time to deploy a parachute and that will slow us down. For the first test, I didn't put the parachute on. This was just to see how the engine would do and if it was actually going to glide with this sort of thing. I had to leave the spoiler on for at least one run. I do like this engine. It's a really cool sort of flame effect you get out of the back of it. However, it's not really powerful enough. It's quick. Don't get me wrong. This is still pretty damn fast that we are going down here, 150 meters a second. When I decided to shut it off, I was seeing how effective the brakes were. The answer is not really. The brakes it doesn't do enough to slow it down, and we did get a little bit of a glide, which I was pleased to see. We do eventually tumble over, and everything does explode. For a first test, though, it was kind of success. I mean, okay, so first of all, we rolled a car, so it's a proper FailRace video, and it did get up to a half-decent speed, so I set it out again, and we'd have another go. This time, testing the sort of the slowing down system with the parachute mounted on the top. That's about the only place I could put a parachute on it, so yeah, it'll have to do. But again, the engine is just not quite powerful enough to be moving this vehicle. It's not the most aerodynamical of shapes ever, but it's not too bad. The engine, no, we've just not got the speed, even if I don't turn it off before the end. We're cracking 100, I think about 185 meters a second when we left the runway there, but it's nowhere near fast enough. Quick, but not fast enough. And as far as the testing of the braking method, well, the cockpit survived. There was an explosion of bits as the sort of the main fuel tank and so on didn't survive the impact, but the cockpit, the wing bits survived, and the air intake is having a whale of a time in the in the water over there. Very, very bouncy air intake. The slowing down method worked, so we could survive it, but the engine is just not powerful enough. The Whiplash turbojet engine thing, not quite going to cut it, so we had to upgrade. We don't need the air scoop anymore either, so we can get rid of that. I was having a look through trying to decide what engine was best to go with it. I figured that this would be the next logical step. It also is sort of the right size for the fuel tank, if you like, so it sits quite neatly on the back of the vehicle, and again we would give it another test. Now there's no reason why that the whole slight gliding and parachute method shouldn't work, or with this. It might be a slightly heavier engine, but it's not a huge amount. It's all about, will the engine be powerful enough to get it up to the speeds? Control-wise, everything was still working. It was still going in a nice straight line, and control was still there. We were going quicker as we get up to 240 meters a second as we leave the runway. Got a little bit of gliding going on, deploy the parachute, and everything is okay. 240 meters a second is not bad at all, certainly, for one of the early builds, but we're still 100 meters a second down on our goal. This could well get up to the speed given a longer runway, but this is the length of space that I have. So I backed it up all the way to the very edge of the runway, seeing if I could get just a little. It wasn't likely to be enough. The few extra meters is not going to be enough to get 100 meters a second, but it may be enough to get a little bit more. So again, we fire up the engine, slightly. We sort of ended up launching slightly, pulling to the right, but there's still enough control to adjust it to get it back on course, which I was pleased about. The aero steering, in effect, was working. Speed, we got a few more meters a second there, but it wasn't enough. The gliding was working. We slightly banged the engine on the floor. We pulled up a little too hard. Lost the engine, but that's okay. It didn't take out anything important. And again, it will slow down and get stopped. But we need more thrust. We need more power for the vehicle to be getting up to more speed. It's just not got enough. It's not enough runway for it to get up to the speed. So we need a bigger engine. Here's the problem. The bigger engine, well, doesn't really fit. As you can, not only does it not sort of fit on the fuel tank and so on, the wheels wouldn't touch the ground, which is an issue. So time for some bigger wheels, and these are really quite ridiculously big wheels. These ones. Again, how on earth you would ever get a rover into space with these wheels, I do not know, but they are spectacular. And these ones will have more than enough ground clearance for the engine at the back, but they're also again, a lot worse on the aerodynamic front. Having these, you don't see many land speed record cars with essentially monster truck tires on them, probably for good reasons. But I figured, I'll give it a go. We have a very, very powerful rocket on the back here, so maybe that'll be enough to overcome all of that. Put it on the on the runway and fired the thing up. The immediate problem was the suspension was a little bit too soft, and it's instantly nosedived. I may also have forgotten to take the steering or turn the steering off on the wheels. But the big issue there with the just completely nosediving, I was trying to be a lot more careful on the next run with the steering input. But the wheels were not quite the ideal one. I meant to turn the engine off, ended up changing camera angle, but the suspension was far too soft. Now these wheels, very cool option. You can adjust a lot of the sort of the setup for them if you like. So tinkered around with the suspension so that it wouldn't just sort of nosedive, but we still had the issue. This time the car was pulling quite badly to the left, and I tried to get it to turn right. It wouldn't do it. The problem is that the drag from the wheels, it was just too much. It was unsettling the vehicle too much. So I had to abandon that idea. So for the Mark IV version of my land speed record car, we went for it was the same basic idea, but I needed more power, so I stuck another rocket on top of it. Now, okay, it's a slightly strange idea, perhaps. It's maybe not the most aerodynamically efficient way of doing it, but it's not as bad as with the huge tires, because we can have sort of a nose cone on the front of the rocket on the top, and the hope was that it would be okay. It would be controllable, and that's basically what we need to do. You'll also notice it's got lots of the supporting braces between the rockets. It's actually connected via a decoupler. We're not going to use a decoupler. That's just a way of connecting it neatly, and lashed together with the supporting braces to stop it wobbling around. If you don't do that, it can occasionally sort of twist, and if the rocket on the top twists, you're going to go wildly out of control. So we fired this one up to give it a little bit of a test. Again, though, we were having control issues. The vehicle was not as nice and controllable as it had been to start with. Again, I put it down to the suspension slightly to begin with, so I went and adjusted that, give the vehicle a lot stiffer suspension so it can't move around as much, and that cured it to an extent. It was certainly now much more controllable. We were picking up some good speed as we get past the 200 meters a second mark. We're about 260 almost as it leaves the end of the runway. But that's not that much faster than it was with one rocket. So adding the second rocket on the top has not really added that much more speed. Now, part of that is down to, we do have a lot more thrust, yes, but we have a lot more weight on the vehicle, and it's not massively, it's not as aerodynamic as it was. To combat the weight, I opted to use a tiny fuel tank on the top. Fuel's not an issue. I don't need to worry about the actual fuel usage, but I needed some way of mounting the engine. I have to mount the engine on a fuel tank, so I put a small fuel tank on the top, but it didn't like this at all. It was very uncontrollable. I did a few runs, none of them really worked particularly well. This one's certainly the most spectacular, with its veering off course and rolling. Sadly, we lost the parachute in the roll, and the brakes weren't going to be up to the job of getting it stopped. Yeah, having the little fuel tank on the top, it really didn't like that one. It was just too sort of aerodynamically unstable. So I had to revert to, slightly changing the design. This is actually much more like the, Thrust SSC that currently has the land speed record. It kind of does remind me of that vehicle a little bit, with the we've got three rockets on it, 3 fuel tanks, a much more stable design, much more sensible design, to be honest, than sticking a rocket on the top. Also, having quite a wide base is useful again for the stability, and that's what a lot of this is about building a vehicle that you can keep control of as it starts getting up to the higher speeds. And while yes, we do have some more rockets and so on, we have added more weight, and that's again going to slow us down. It's the acceleration that's so important for this particular challenge. Again, I have no doubt this would beat the 341 meters a second mark, but we have to do it in such a short space of time, and adding the more weight on is not necessarily good. We get 270 meters a second as we leave the runway. Unfortunately, now it is a little bit too big for the little stubby wings that I had on. It didn't really glide. I also deployed the parachute before turning off the engines, and that broke the parachute. But we did get some more speed out of it, so I backed it all the way up to the edge of the runway just to get that little bit more, see if I could get that little bit more speed, and also went pretty much full throttle straight away. Control was very good, much nicer to control than some of the previous builds that I had. Yeah, it was up to 280 meters a second as we left the runway, but still not fast enough. Even for getting the crashing at the end, I can adjust that. I could add bigger wings to it, essentially. Admittedly, this is a strange thing to be doing, but you could add bigger wings to make it glide better, but we hadn't got the speed when it came to the end of the runway. So I strapped even more rockets to it. Got some solid fuel boosters and stuck them on the top. Again, we're adding more weight, but we're adding a lot more thrust. Aerodynamics is a small concern with this. It was much faster, 320 meters a second, as we left the runway. It's still not fast enough. That's 20 meters a second too slow. Next attempt, I backed it all the way up to the end of the runway to fire it down. We did just start losing control of it at the end, and we hit the sort of the landing lights. The control was a slight issue. With having the rockets mounted on the top. It was okay, but if it did start to wander, it didn't work at all. So I had to go for a drastic redesign for this one. Just adding more and more rockets wasn't really working, so I went to focus on aerodynamics. We went for the I think it's the Mark III cockpit with the nice inline fuel tanks and the nice little sort of streamlined wheels. And I was hoping, while we're not going to have as much power in this one as that 5 rocket monstrosity that just went, hoping better aerodynamics, we should be able to use or to get to a higher speed quickly with what power we do have. And this is all about the acceleration. Also, this is far, far lighter than the rocket that we used before. So even with a smaller, less powerful, or far less thrust in it, I was hoping we could get up to some decent speed. For the first test run, I was pretty pleased with it. 280 meters a second as we left the runway with just one rocket on the back, and being much smaller and much lighter, the kind of gliding of it was also much more effective. We could get it off the end of the runway, and it would keep in the air. It wouldn't just plow into the ground. So now, with everything working, attach the parachute to the back, and we should have no issues. Also, this can seat 2 people now. So Bob is joined by Valentina. Is permanently excited by these. Bob is permanently terrified of the land speed record cars. We get to the end of the runway. It's again 280 meters a second. Deploy the parachute, and it is it's gone quite high, actually, I have to say. Glide surprise. I wasn't expecting these things to glide. I just wanted them to kind of get off the runway and be in the air enough to deploy the parachute. Didn't expect them to get sort of quite so much height with such tiny little wings, and the only control surfaces I have on here are the tail fins. And yeah, does surprisingly well off the end. And I was even happier to see that when we splashed down into the water this time, the whole thing survived. The car is completely and utterly intact. It's yeah, I was very pleased to see all of that, but we didn't have enough speed. So it came to actually add another rocket. There is another option for these fuel tanks, like the fuselage of this plane. There's one that goes into 2 slots at the back, which means I can fit 2 rocket engines on the back while still keeping the same sort of dimensions. By far the nicest to control vehicle, and sure enough, there we go. We've cracked we've broken the land speed record. We got about to 370 meters a second. Unfortunately, for me to count this, I had to survive it. I may have forgotten. I was so excited having got the speed, I forgot to deploy the parachute until too late, and then we had a little crash. On the next run, again, we were past the land speed record. Off the end, I deployed the parachute a little bit too soon, and that broke it. I'm not quite sure if I deployed it slightly with the engines on and I burnt it, or I deployed it too soon while it's twisting and that broke it. Either way, yeah, that one there didn't work. So it was for the third time lucky. Now I can't back this up to the end of the run, or to the maximum extent of the runway, because these wheels aren't powered. So I have no way of reversing it. But it doesn't matter. It's got enough acceleration to get up to the speed because it's light and got a decent amount of thrust. As we fly down the runway, it is 300. I went frame by frame. It's 377.6 meters a second that this vehicle will get to before it leaves the runway. We deploy the parachute, and it comes gracefully back down into the water, for a new land speed record. That's 377.6 is 844 miles an hour. 844 miles an hour before we ran out of runway with the Falcon land speed record car. Valentina's now rolled a car on Eve, driven on the moon, and set a new land speed record. I was very pleased to have got this. It's such a lovely, simple design as well. I went for all this really complicated stuff, and none of it is as quick as this. It's really nice, simple, just lightweight, aerodynamic, and that's all you need. But I couldn't quite leave it there. Nah, I had to try sticking on these huge solid fuel boosters. I didn't bother with decouplers or anything, just bolt them onto the side, and it's fine. Did add some aerodynamic nose cones in an attempt. It's now not as nice and aerodynamic as it was. It's also now not as nice and light, but these things have huge amounts of thrust. So again, I was hoping that we could get up to this. These could overcome the extra weight and the now lack of aerodynamics. So this is now the Mark. Well, 7.5. It's just sort of bolt on some big boosters. I should probably have lashed them down with the braces. They did look like they were a bit wobbly there, but once it got going, it was fine. I have no doubt that this would go much faster than the normal one. The problem is that the acceleration, it's actually slightly slower, about 10 meters a second slower as we leave the end of the runway. I may also have forgotten that you can't turn off the solid fuel boosters. So now we have a plane. Again, I'm amazed how well this flies. This is designed to go quickly on the... It's not designed to do this bit. It's off. There's nothing I can do at this stage other than wait until the boosters sort of run out. I was really amazed at how well this kind of... Well, sort of glides. It's not really a proper plane, but it does the job. I was messing about with the controls, seeing how much control we had, and it was, a surprising amount. We got it up to, I think, about 2,000 meters. Then it got a bit unhappy. It didn't... It wasn't really, didn't really like going up there. Then we're starting to sort of boost ourselves towards the ocean, which is not what you want either. Fortunately, it runs out of fuel at just about the right time, and then we can deploy the parachute and slow ourselves down and get the vehicle safely into the water. Yeah, but adding the rockets on the top made it 10 meters a second slower. So all that extra thrust, I have no doubt in a longer runway, that extra thrust, sure, you could get it to a much higher speed, but at the runway that we have, it doesn't help. It's just sort of too much weight and too much drag that it can't get up to speed in time. So this is the best design that I came up with. Honestly, a lovely, simple design, surprisingly easy to control as well when you're barreling down the runway at sort of 600-700 miles an hour. Yeah, very, very easy to control, all things considered. And I thought for a finale, we'll go for a first-person speed run. It is, rather scary from inside this vehicle. So we power up the engines and just sort of launch it. It's not a particularly long runway, but it gets up to speed. It's really, really rather quickly. I am slightly drifting to the left on this one, but it's okay. Again, it's about 370 meters a second as we leave the runway. Then the terrifying, it's absolutely out of control at this stage. You just turn the engines off, deploy the parachute, and hope it comes gracefully down into the water. Eventually it sorts itself out, and there we are, into the drink. Not the conventional way of sort of Valentina's, not quite as ecstatic as she was during the actual run, I suspect, with that landing. Yeah, it's not the conventional way of slowing down and stopping one of these sort of rocket cars, but it does the trick. It gets the vehicle stopped, and it is perfectly survivable, which is slightly surprising. We'll get Bob out of the vehicle as well. So there we go. I have broken the land speed record on Kerbal Space Program, 844 miles an hour with this lovely sort of... I love how when you go to... I went to change camera to get Valentina out as well, and the thing rocks massively for some reason. But lovely simple vehicle. The complex ones just weren't as good as this... as this one. But there we go. That is it for this video, guys. Thank you very much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.